For over 2 decades now, Devil May Cry has built a reputation as one of the most stylish action franchises in gaming, defined by its fast-paced combat, over-the-top characters, and excellent demonic lore. But despite that, I completely missed out on the series growing up, so I recently decided to change that over the last year. That's right, I went back and played through all 5 of the mainline games, as well as the DMC reboot that we try not to think about, and then took it a few steps further, reading the manga, the novels, watching both animated series, and even listening to the drama CDs. And with that all under my belt now, I am officially ready to give you the ultimate Devil May Cry timeline. Now, I have made another timeline on this for another channel, however this is an updated and improved version, taking into consideration the feedback from the comments, as well as the new Netflix series. But before we get into it, this is a new channel, so if there's another series that you'd like us to cover, let me know in the comments down below. We're also posting a God of War and Pokemon timeline alongside this one, so there's plenty for you to check out already. And if you do enjoy this video, remember subscribing is a massive help to get this new channel off the ground. But enough of the YouTube stuff, you're here for big guns, bigger swords, and the occasional motorcycle being used like a baseball bat. So let's dive all the way back to the beginning. At the start of time, everything was shrouded in darkness. Yet even in that void was a small ray of light. Eventually, these forces split apart, giving rise to 2 distinct realms. The demon world, born from the darkness, and the human world, shaped by the light. For thousands of years, these worlds existed independently. However, the ruler of the demon world came to believe that the separation was unnatural, that both realms were meant to be united under a single authority, his authority. And so he unleashed a full-scale invasion, as demons poured into the human world and began systematically overwhelming it. Humanity had no way to fight back against the sheer power of the demonic forces, and one by one, their strongholds began to fall. It was brutal chaos, and humans lived in constant fear and subjugation till about 2,000 years ago with the rise of another powerful demon named Mundus. After consuming a flute from the Qlipoth tree, Mundus underwent a transformation that elevated him far beyond other demons, ultimately allowing him to seize control of the Underworld. However, not everyone agreed with his rule. A rival devil god called Argosax challenged him, and their conflict resulted in a division that split the demon world. Of course, Mundus also had allies as well. Most notably in this era was a warrior that would become a legend, Sparda, a demon knight that was completely unmatched in battle. And if he wasn't enough on his own, his 2 disciples also stood at his side, the twin brothers Baal and Modius. For now, the 3 of them were still firmly aligned with the forces of darkness, but that would not last forever, and change was coming. Over time, Mundus grew unsatisfied with ruling only part of the demon world and turned his attention to the world of light instead. Another invasion began, and once again, humanity was pushed to the brink of extinction. But this time was different. Sparda watched the destruction and began to question the purpose of the war. They weren't just conquering this realm, they were destroying it, and it was senseless, brutal, and cruel. And in that realization, he made a decision that would alter the course of history by defecting from Mundus's forces. Before departing, though, he told his students to choose their own path. He wouldn't force his decision on them, and allowed them to choose their own destiny. But once he bid them farewell, he turned his blade against the demon army, and despite being alone, began driving them back. Against all odds, he succeeded not only in repelling the invasion, but also in confronting Mundus directly, sealing him away and bringing the conflict to an end. However, Sparda understood that as long as a connection between the 2 realms remained available, another invasion was inevitable. So to prevent that, he targeted the source of that connection, a tower called Temen Nigru, which functioned as a gateway between the realms. Through a ritual that combined his own power, the blood of a human priestess, his sword, and a mystical amulet, Sparda sealed the tower and closed the passage between the worlds. To ensure that it could never be opened easily in the future, he then sealed away powerful entities to guard it, including Cerberus, Agni and Rudra, Nevin, Beowulf, and Leviathan, and as an additional safeguard, stole the names of the 7 deadly sins and used them as a seal which forced the entire tower beneath the earth. However, Temen Nigru was not the only gate to the demon world, so his work was not finished yet. In Fortuna, another gateway within a massive monolith could also be found, and using his sword Yamato, Sparta severed that link as well, cutting off yet another hellgate between the realms. In the aftermath of the war, Sparta remained in the human world, taking on the role of a protector and guiding humanity as it began to rebuild. Rather than ruling through fear or power, he helped civilization develop until they were capable of standing on their own, and once they reached that point, he disappeared, leaving about another 2,000 years of unrecorded history in his life. Among the few confirmed events that we have for him is his alliance with a group known as the Protectors, who were led by a woman named Matie. During this period, Sparta once again entered the demon world, where he confronted and defeated both Argosax and a powerful dark knight named Bulwark. In Argosax's case, Sparta didn't actually destroy him though, and instead sealed him away on the Isle of Vie De Marli using 4 sacred relics. Afterwards, he returned once more to the human world where he lived in secret. From here, we need to jump forward a bit. Sometime in the 20th century, Sparta lived among humanity as what seemed to be a normal man. During this time, he fell in love with a woman named Eva, and together they had twin sons named Dante and Vergil. The family settled near Redgrave City, where Sparta raised his children and trained them in combat, though he kept the fact that he was a demon hidden away from them. At some point before their 8th birthday, Eva gifted each of the twins with half of Sparta's amulet, entrusting them with a part of the key that was needed to unlock Temen Nigru. Their family lived peacefully together until Sparta suddenly died under mysterious circumstances, leaving Eva and the boys completely unprotected, which is bad news as while Sparta had been living quietly in the human world, Mundus was taking active steps to free himself and take revenge. And now that Sparta was gone, he was ready to make his move. And so he sent a legion of demons to destroy what remained of Sparta's family. However, this attack was mostly unsuccessful. Mundus's forces managed to kill Eva, but her sacrifice gave both of her sons a chance to escape and survive, though unfortunately in the chaos of the attack, they were separated. Believing his brother had died, Dante was left alone with the trauma of that night and ended up taking his mother's final words to heart, abandoning his identity and living under the name Tony Redgrave in hopes of avoiding future attention from the monsters that had attacked his family. But most importantly, he developed a powerful anger towards both demons in general, as well as his father, who he blamed for not being there when it mattered most. Vergil, on the other hand, had not been home when the demons arrived. Instead, he was ambushed while he was alone, and by the time he made it back to his home, it was already over. Everything was destroyed and being burnt to the ground, and this moment completely broke him. The stress caused Vergil's dormant power to awaken, and with that new strength, he used his father's sword, Yamato, to kill all the remaining demons. But unlike Dante, Vergil never learned the truth of what happened. He didn't know that his mother had died searching for him and instead believed that she had abandoned him along with his brother. And so, rather than searching for Dante, he chose to live alone and become stronger so that nothing like this could ever happen to him again. Meanwhile, Dante's life didn't exactly get any easier. After everything that happened, he eventually made his way to Morris Island, where he was taken in by a foster mother and started trying to rebuild his life. But just like his first home, this island was also attacked by demons, and the entire town was burned to the ground. The few survivors tried to explain to the world that demons were responsible, but of course no one believed them. Instead, everyone else blamed Dante and his foster mother, as officials refused to accept that anything supernatural was involved. And because of that, they were forced to leave the town behind. However, his friend and foster brother Ernest remained determined to prove the truth of what actually happened. As the years passed, Dante took up a life as a mercenary, still operating under the fake name Tony Redgrave. He partnered with a man named Gru, and the two of them took on various jobs together before eventually going their separate ways. But soon he picked up another partner, being a mysterious masked mercenary called Gilver. Around this time, he also met a talented gunsmith named Nell Goldstein, who would go on to create his iconic pistols, Ebony and Ivory, for him. Gru, however, makes a return when his daughter gets sick, and he becomes so desperate to pay for her medical bills that he accepts a contract to assassinate Gilver. It is during this mission that he learns the truth, that Gilver isn't a human. Instead, he is an agent working for the demon world and actively working to open a gateway between the realms. And despite his best efforts, Gru is unable to stop him, and Gilver kills him. When Dante learns of what happened, he went to check on Gru's daughter at the sanatorium, only to find that it was already overrun by demons and transformed into a full-fledged gateway to the demon world. He manages to fight his way through the chaos, however, by the time he actually reaches her, he realizes that there's nothing he can do to save her, and so he chooses to end her suffering instead, closing the gateway in the process. But that wasn't exactly something that other people could understand, and other mercenaries turned on him and held him responsible for both the incident at the sanatorium as well as Gru's death. With nowhere else to go, Dante took refuge at Nell Goldstein's house, completely unaware that Gilver had been orchestrating everything from behind the scenes, until finally it was time for him to actually make his move and attack Dante. The battle between them was intense, but in the end, Dante came out on top. However, the victory came at the cost of Nell's life. Afterwards, Dante removed Gilver's mask, and to his surprise, it was his brother's face underneath it, though it wasn't actually Vergil. In reality, Gilver was a clone of Vergil, and an anagram of his name, created by Mundus using Vergil's likeness, and sent specifically to hunt Dante down. As it was clear that his enemies already knew how to find him, the Tony Redgrave name no longer seemed relevant, and so Dante picks up his true identity once again. At the same time, he made sure to honor Gru's memory by financially supporting his surviving daughters, and doing what he could to make up for everything that had happened. Meanwhile, during the years Dante spent in hiding, the real Vergil had traveled to Fortuna to investigate the Order of the Sword, a religious group that worships Sparta as a god. After observing them, Vergil eventually leaves, but not before making it clear that they had no understanding of the power that they were following. However, he did leave something behind in Fortuna, as he impregnated a woman who would later give birth to his son, Nero. Nero was eventually discovered and taken in by the family of Credo and Kyrie, who treated him as one of their own. Growing up, though, he struggled to fit in and was often targeted by others who spread rumors about his mother. However, over time, he managed to find a place for himself by joining the Order of the Sword alongside Credo and dedicating himself to protecting Fortuna from demonic threats. At the same time, a scholar named Arkham begins researching the legend of Sparta, and like most people who go down that path, it quickly becomes an obsession for him. He gets fixated on obtaining Sparta's power for himself, believing that if he can pull it off, he'll become a god and rule the world. Eventually, Arkham crosses paths with Vergil and tells him about the legend of Temen ni Gru, explaining that the tower can be raised again if the seals placed by Sparta are undone, those being the 7 deadly sins, whose true names have been stripped away from them for thousands of years now. If those names are restored, the gateway opens, and with it, a path to Sparta's power becomes available. And finally, Arkham tells Vergil that the key to all of this is the Force Edge, a sword that contains Sparta's full strength. While Arkham begins searching for the sins, Vergil wanders the city, where he is mistaken for Dante by Enzo Ferrino, confirming that Dante is in fact nearby in the city. And sure enough, Dante is in town, now running a demon hunting business, though he still hasn't come up with a proper name for it yet. He takes on jobs through Enzo, who acts as his information broker, and before long he's handed a massive contract for $4 million to track down a girl named Alice and bring her back home. Following the lead, Dante tracks Alice down, only to discover that she's been taken in by a demon known as the White Rabbit, which has possessed her favorite doll. The rabbit reveals that he knows about Vergil and even offers to arrange a reunion between the two brothers, but Dante isn't really interested. Instead, things take a strange turn when the rabbit transforms Alice into an adult woman to flirt with and manipulate Dante, but luckily that fails, and the act gets dropped entirely as she reveals her true demonic form. She attacks, but Dante manages to subdue her in his own devil form without seriously harming her. At that point, the White Rabbit admits that he was the one who hired Dante in the first place, as he wanted to witness the legendary son of Sparta in action. That said, before Dante leaves, the rabbit tries to buy his half of the perfect amulet, but once again Dante refuses. When Dante returns to his shop, he finds Alice there waiting for him, and not thinking much of it, he tries to get her to leave and heads off to clean up, leaving his half of the amulet completely unattended, which is an interesting move after a demon bunny just tried to get it from him. Naturally, Alice takes the opportunity to steal it, leaving behind a map for Dante to follow. The trail leads him to an old church where he encounters another of the rabbit's associates, being the Mad Hatter, who tried to trick Dante into speaking the true name of one of the demons sealed away by Sparta. But Dante doesn't fall for it, which would have ended the Hatter's plans if Vergil didn't arrive moments later to say the name himself. For the first time in years, the two brothers are face to face, but the reunion is short-lived, and a battle breaks out between them. Vergil completely outmatches Dante, taking his half of the amulet with ease, only to return it seconds later when Dante asks for it back. Vergil then tells him that he's able to take it whenever he wants, so he doesn't mind Dante holding on to it for the time being. By this point, though, it doesn't really matter. With the true names of the sins restored, the seal binding Temmen Nigru begins to break, and the tower rises above the earth. With everything finally in place, Arkham moves forward with his plans. However, in order to complete the ritual and claim Sparta's power, he needs to sacrifice his own wife, Kalina Ann, who just so happens to be a descendant of the priestess originally involved in sealing the demon world. The ritual does grant him power, however, it isn't exactly in the way he expected. Instead of becoming a god, Arkham is left horribly disfigured, and while he does gain some demonic strength, it's clear that something has gone very wrong in the process. More importantly, though, his daughter Mary witnessed everything that happened, and the moment completely shatters her. From that point on, she abandons her name Mary and dedicates herself to the goal of killing Arkham for what he has done to her mother. But back to Dante. A full year passes since his last encounter with Vergil, and we finally arrived at the events of Devil May Cry 3. Everything kicks off when Arkham approaches Dante directly and delivers an invitation to Temmen Nigru from his brother. Once inside the tower, Dante quickly realizes that he's not alone, as two others are already making their way through it. The first is a strange demonic jester who seems to guide Dante along the path, though he clearly has his own agenda. And the second is Mary from the comics that we just covered, who has come here to kill her father. That said, she doesn't go by that name anymore and tells Dante to call her whatever he wants, and naturally he lands on the incredibly creative name of Lady. Lady is climbing the tower alongside Dante, but before she can reach the top, she is confronted by Arkham, who wastes no time in throwing her straight off of the tower. Luckily, Dante manages to catch her mid-fall, which she immediately repays by shooting him in the head. That forces him to drop her, and she ends up saving herself anyways because she's a badass. As Dante continues his ascent, he faces off with the tower's gatekeepers one by one, and with each victory, their souls transform into new weapons and abilities, steadily increasing his power and bringing him closer to his brother's strength. And speaking of which, waiting for him at the top of Temmen Nigru is Vergil. The two clash once again, and just like before, Vergil comes out on top. During this fight, he questions Dante about why he refuses to claim their father's power, to which Dante responds that he doesn't even consider Sparta to be his father after he abandoned their family. So this is only in the English translation, and in the original he just says that he doesn't like Vergil, and that's the reason why. It has nothing to do with their father. However, as Dante hangs on at the edge of death, he finally awakens his devil trigger. The strength he gains in that moment is on an entirely different level, but while Vergil is ready to keep fighting, before things can actually continue, Arkham steps in and convinces him to pull back, and with that, they both jump from the tower. Vergil and Arkham reach the final door leading to the Lair of Judgment, at which point Vergil decides he no longer needs his partner, especially since he knows that Arkham fully intends to betray him and take Sparta's power for himself, and so he kills Arkham and presses forward alone, soon entering the lair where he encounters Beowulf and almost immediately defeats him, claiming his power as a devil arm. Meanwhile, Dante tries to follow from the top of the tower, but when he jumps off, he winds up being swallowed whole by Leviathan. He fights his way through from inside, tearing through it piece by piece before eventually escaping and making his way back into Temmen Nigru. But as he continues upward, he comes across Arkham's body right as Lady catches up to him. She accuses Dante of stealing her revenge and killing her father, and Dante doesn't bother correcting her. He just shrugs it off and keeps moving, letting her believe whatever she wants. However, in reality, Arkham isn't quite dead yet, and using the last of his strength, he speaks to Lady and reveals the truth, that Vergil was the one manipulating everything and pushed him towards killing his own wife. So, with his final breath, he asks his daughter to kill Vergil and stop him from opening the gate. As they talk, Dante finally catches up to his brother, who attempts to perform the ritual to unlock the demon world. He cuts his hand to supply the blood of Sparta and brings the perfected amulet, however the gate still won't open. But Dante isn't going to stand around and give his brother more time to figure things out, and the brothers fight yet again. And with Dante's new devil powers, he's finally a fairly even match for Vergil. Even Lady quickly joins the fight soon after and tries to kill Vergil as her father asks, though admittedly she doesn't exactly match up to the brothers. In the end, both Dante and Vergil go for a finishing blow at the same time, cutting into each other and spilling their blood directly onto the ritual site. This causes everything to finally fall into place. The demon jester suddenly reappears and drops his act entirely, revealing that he was Arkham all along. Every step of their journey had been carefully planned out, including convincing Vergil to not kill Dante earlier, because both brothers need to be present at the ritual. Each of them carried half of Sparda's essence, and without both of their blood, the ritual couldn't be completed. That's why Vergil was never able to open the gate on his own, even with the perfect amulet in his possession. But even then, one final component was still missing, the blood of the priestess. And now that lady, the descendant of that very priestess, was present, Arkham is finally able to make his move. He stabs his daughter through the leg, adding her blood to the ritual and completing the final requirement. And with that, the gateway to the demon world is fully opened. At that point, Dante, Vergil, and Lady all temporarily set aside their differences to stop him, but the moment doesn't last long. As the tower begins shifting and collapsing around them, Arkham forces them off of his platform and continues rising to the top as he leaves them behind. Dante tries to chase after him, but along the way runs into Lady once again, who is still badly injured. This time, he tells her straight up to stop risking her life and to leave Arkham to him. She doesn't like it, but she knows that she's not in any condition to keep going, so instead, she hands over her rocket launcher and lets Dante finish the fight in her place. By the time that Dante reaches Arkham in the demon world, it is already too late though. Arkham has claimed the Force Edge, and with it, he attempts to take on Sparda's power. For a moment, it seems like it's going to work, and he physically takes on Sparda's appearance, but his body can't handle it. The power overwhelms him almost instantly, twisting him into something unstable and monstrous. Even like this though, the strength he gains is far beyond anything that Dante can handle alone. But luckily, he doesn't have to. At the last second, Vergil shows up, and for the first time, the two brothers actually fight on the same side. Together they manage to overpower Arkham and separate him from both the Force Edge and the amulets, stripping away his power in the process. Arkham is sent crashing back to the human world, landing right in front of his daughter, and even then, he still tries to talk his way out of things. He begs for his life, claims that what he did wasn't any different from Sparda's own actions, and says that he only killed one woman, whereas Sparda became a legend for his atrocities, so Arkham should be forgiven, praised, or even worshipped. And now you can say a lot about Lady, but one thing is for certain, she does not put up with this kind of nonsense, and before her father can even finish begging, she pulls the trigger and shoots him over and over until she is completely out of bullets and confident that he won't be getting up again. But while her story reaches its conclusion, Vergil's is far from over. The moment the Force Edge is freed, both brothers go for it, but Vergil gets there first. Dante tries to reason with him, telling him that even if he gains their father's power, it won't make him who Sparda was, adding that their father's soul still lives on in both of them, and that part of him is now telling him that Vergil needs to be stopped. However, Vergil isn't interested in any of that. To him, the only thing that matters is power, and so they need to fight one more time, and this time, Dante finally wins. As their battle comes to an end, the portal to the human world begins to collapse, without the amulet sustaining it anymore. Vergil makes the choice to stay behind in the demon world, and lets himself fall into its depths with his half of the amulet. Dante did try to pull him back, reaching out at the last second, but Vergil just cuts his hand away and lets himself fall. With no time left to try and save him again, Dante grabs the Force Edge and escapes back to the human realm. Now, outside the tower, he reunites with Lady and returns her weapon, and as they talk, Dante starts to break down over the loss of his brother for the second time. However, he quickly tries to hide it, blaming it on the rain and insisting that devils never cry. However, Lady doesn't buy it and tells him that even a devil might cry if they lose someone they care about, and hearing that finally gives Dante a fitting name for his business, Devil May Cry. As for Vergil, he finds the Demon King Mundus in the Underworld, and despite being severely weakened by his battles with Dante and Arkham, claims that if his father could defeat Mundus, then so could he, before charging into battle. However, he is quickly defeated and Mundus corrupts him, giving him the new form of Nello Angelo. But even after corrupting one of Sparda's sons, Mundus isn't satisfied. If he truly wanted his revenge, then Dante either had to die or be reined in as well. But unlike Vergil, that wasn't something he could accomplish immediately. Over the next decade, leading into the events of Devil May Cry 1, Mundus created a demon named Trish, and took care to make her look exactly like Dante's mother Eva. Soon he sends her to Dante's shop, where she immediately attacks him. She then plays this off as a test though, and once she's satisfied with his show of strength, explains that Mundus is preparing to return to the human world from Millet Island. She then tells Dante that if he wants revenge, this is his chance, and soon the two of them head out together. Once they arrive though, Trish quickly rushes ahead, leaving Dante to navigate the island on his own, while she takes a much more direct route. That means that Dante is left exploring the castle, cutting his way through Mundus' forces, including Phantom, Griffin, and the bioweapon Nightmare, but most importantly, he comes across Nello Angelo. At first, Dante has no idea who or what he's dealing with, and in their initial encounter, Nello completely overwhelms him. But instead of killing Dante, he suddenly retreats when he notices Dante's half of the perfect amulet. It is not until their third battle that things finally come full circle. This time, Dante actually manages to win, and when Nello Angelo is defeated, he drops the other half of the amulet, finally cluing Dante into the fact that he had been fighting Vergil this whole time. With both halves of the amulet now reunited, Dante unlocks the true form of the Force Edge, transforming it into the Sparda sword. He then reunites with Trish, only to fall into a trap when she reveals that she is a spy for Mundus, and Dante must once again fight off Nightmare, but their battle causes a massive pillar to fall apart, and despite her betrayal, Dante needs to dive in to push Trish out of the way and save her, explaining that he is only doing so because she looks like his mother though. And with that, he tells her to stay away from him, making it clear that next time he will not hesitate to let her die, or even take her out himself. From there, Dante rushes forward and finally confronts Mundus, arriving just in time to see him preparing to execute Trish for failing in her mission. Even after everything she has done, Dante still steps in to stop him, taking a brutal hit in the process. Mundus then follows up and tries to kill him while he is weakened, but this time Trish is the one who intervenes and sacrifices herself to protect Dante. Her death pushes Dante beyond his limits and allows him to fully awaken the power of Sparda. With the Sparda sword in hand, he taps into his father's true form and challenges Mundus in the demon realm. In the end, he comes out on top and manages to defeat the ruler of the Underworld. After the battle, he returns to where Trish fell and places the Sparda sword as well as the reunited amulet beside her before walking away, believing that she is gone for good. And as Dante makes his way off the collapsing island, it seems like everything is finally over, but Mundus isn't finished just yet. Even in a severely weakened state, he chases Dante back into the human world for one final confrontation. Dante manages to fight back a little bit, but after everything he's been through, he is clearly running on fumes, and for a moment it looks like this actually might be where it ends for him. That is, until Trish returns. At the last second, she reappears and channels her power into Dante's guns, giving him just enough strength to turn the fight around. With her help, Dante is finally able to banish Mundus back to the demon realm once again. However, even after all of this, as he fades away, the demon promises that one day he will return. With the battle finally over, Trish breaks into tears as she is overwhelmed with guilt for everything that she has done and apologizes to Dante. But instead of being angry, he tells her that the fact that she is able to cry proves that she has changed and that she has found her humanity, because as he puts it, devils never cry. With no time to waste, the two escape the sinking island using a conveniently placed plane, and from that point on they begin working together as partners. In fact, Dante even renames his shop to Devil Never Cry to reflect this new partnership. Over the years, Dante and Trish develop a strong team, though their contrasting habits sometimes irritate one another. They take on a job from Enzo Farino, which leads them to an ancient ruin, where Enzo finds a devil arm resembling a gun. Trish speculates that the weapon might have been crafted by Machiavelli, a legendary demon gunsmith known for forging weapons like Artemis. However, the devil arm turns hostile and attempts to consume Enzo. Dante does manage to save his friend, but needs to cut off his arm in order to do so, severing his connection to the weapon. This traumatic event opens Enzo's eyes to the reality of demons, and determined to assist, he establishes a pawn shop for Dante to store his collection of devil arms, ensuring that they won't be able to harm anyone else. After this ordeal, Trish decides to leave Devil Never Cry to hunt down and secure dangerous devil arms in hopes of preventing future tragedies like this one. However, before she leaves, she asks Dante to restore the shop's original name, Devil May Cry. With things back to normal, or at least as normal as they get for Dante, we can jump into the story of the animated series. Well, the first animated series. We'll get into the Netflix one a little bit later. Dante takes on a job for his broker, J.D. Morrison, this time working more like a bodyguard meant to escort a young orphan girl named Patty Lowell to her father's estate so that she can claim her inheritance. But as usual, nothing is ever that straightforward. It turns out Patty isn't even the real heir, and she's just a decoy meant to draw away attention from the true target. And instead of disappearing once the job is done, she ends up sticking around, slowly becoming a permanent part of Dante's life, whether he likes it or not. Even with her around though, not much else really changes. Dante is regularly dealing with Lady and Trish, who show up whenever they feel like it, usually to remind him of all the money he owes them. The two of them don't exactly hit it off at first, but it doesn't take long before they're surprisingly close. Around this time, Dante is unexpectedly reunited with Ernest, his foster brother from Morris Island. Unlike everyone else, Ernest never let go of what happened back then, and spent all this time trying to prove that Dante wasn't responsible for the fire, and eventually decides to take things a step further by attempting to summon the demon that attacked their home, hoping to kill it and finally reveal the truth. Unfortunately, Ernest isn't exactly a demon slayer, and is quickly out of his depth. The moment the demon appears, he is nearly killed, and Dante is forced to step in and finish the fight for him. However, during the battle, Ernest realizes that the demon wasn't there randomly all those years ago, and was specifically hunting Dante. From then on, instead of clearing Dante's name, he begins blaming him for the destruction of Morris Island and everything that followed. But hearing this, Dante doesn't even argue or try to defend himself. He just accepts it and walks away, respecting Ernest's decision to cut ties with him. Not long after, Dante encounters two more demons tied to his father's past, Baal and Modius, the twins who were once trained under Sparta. Modius is fairly friendly with Dante at first, but Baal only wants to prove that he has surpassed Sparta by killing his son. Dante is forced to fight him and kill him in self-defense, which immediately leads to Modius challenging Dante for revenge, ending with the same result. After the battle, Dante takes the time to bury each of their weapons as a memorial to the brothers. Soon, Patty's family history is revealed, and we learn that she is actually a descendant of Alan Lowell, a powerful alchemist who once had the ability to summon and control demons. At one point, Alan attempted to summon a being known as Abigail, but the demon was too powerful for him, and he was forced to steal it away. The key to that seal was a pendant, which was passed down through his family until it eventually reached Patty's mother, Nina, and she, fearing what might happen if anyone discovered the truth, put Patty up for adoption to keep her safe. But that plan falls apart when a manipulative demon named Sid gets involved and convinces Nina to give the pendant to Dante for safekeeping. However, when she starts to regret the decision and asks for it back, Sid kidnaps her. Patty decides to try and take the rescue effort into her own hands, steals the pendant from Dante, and tries to trade it for Nina's safety. Sid agrees, and with the pendant finally in his hands, he's able to awaken Abigail, who actually manages to defeat Dante. She traps him in a comatose state within the demon world, while Sid begins tearing through the human realm unchecked. But all hope isn't lost, as Patty manages to steal the pendant back and follows Dante into the demon world. Her determination is enough to wake Dante, and with his strength fully restored, he overpowers Sid and ends the threat. With everything finally resolved, Patty is reunited with her mother and leaves Devil May Cry behind to start a normal life, though every now and then she does still drop by to check in and help Dante clean his shop. Now, before we jump back into the mainline games, we need to cover the first drama CD. At this point, Dante's situation with Enzo has gotten completely out of hand, and his debt has piled up so much that he is genuinely starting to worry Enzo might start selling the devil arms that he left with him. Because of that, Morrison, Lady, and Patty decide to step in and go meet with Enzo directly. While they are waiting for Dante to show up, a young woman arrives and hands Enzo a strange puzzle. The evil energy within it possesses Lady and takes control of her, revealing the puzzle to be one of Machiavelli's creations. Luckily, Dante shows up right as things start to spiral, though he is completely unarmed. Instead of rushing in blindly, he makes a deal with Enzo, saying that he will fix the situation, but only if his debt is completely cleared. And once Enzo agrees, Dante takes up Cerberus and Alistair and manages to destroy the puzzle without harming Lady. However, once things settle down, Trish tells Morrison that Lady was never actually possessed, and that the entire situation had been staged to recover the devil arms from Enzo so that he could use them to draw out a demon. They could have explained things from the start, but Dante specifically didn't want Enzo getting involved after everything that happened during their last job. And sure enough, that demon doesn't take too long to show up. Once it does, Dante, Trish, and Lady take it down together before returning the devil arms to Enzo like nothing ever happened. After which, Patty questions why Dante continues to leave these weapons with Enzo if it only causes his debt to spiral out of control. But Morrison explains that this was actually intentional. Dante isn't just being irresponsible, this is his way of taking care of the people around him. If he was just to give them money directly, it might come off in the wrong way and feel like he's giving them a handout or that he doesn't feel like they can support themselves. But by putting himself in debt to them, he's able to help them without making it too obvious. In the following drama CD, Dante takes on another job for a woman named Foster who runs an orphanage. Their children have been going missing, and a demon has been disguising himself as Peter Pan to lure them away. Soon Trish steps in though, kills the demon, and brings the whole incident to a very quick end. Meanwhile, in the second novel, Dante ends up taking on a job from a devil hunter named Beryl, who's tracking down a dangerous artifact known as the Beast Heads, which was originally created by Mundus. Her father had previously tried to use its power to bring her mother back to life, but he couldn't handle the demonic energy and was transformed into a demon as a result. While trying to escape with his daughter, he is gunned down and she is stabbed by the beast heads in the chaos, causing her to be directly linked to the artifact and giving her the ability to sense where it is at all times, which is exactly why she ends up seeking Dante out in the first place. Their search eventually brings them into conflict with a criminal organization that is also trying to get their hands on the beast heads for themselves, but after dealing with that though, they finally come face to face with the artifact, at which point the beast heads uses its ability to warp reality and pulls both Dante and Beryl into an alternate universe. In this timeline, Dante was captured by Mundus as a child, while Vergil had already been turned into Nello Angelo and was leading a rebellion against him. Not only that, but Mundus had filled his ranks with an army of Trish-like demons. Naturally, Dante ends up siding with Vergil and joins the resistance trying to bring Mundus down, after which Dante and Beryl are pulled back into their own world, where they finally confront the beast heads directly and manage to destroy it for good. And that finally brings us back to the games with Devil May Cry 2, where a corrupt businessman and sorcerer named Arius uses his wealth to obtain everything and anything related to demons in hopes of becoming more powerful. With his new abilities, Arius even manages to create artificial demons that he calls secretaries. In his pursuit of the occult, he eventually learns of Vie De Marli and sets off on a quest to claim Argosax's power so that he can conquer the entire planet. However, there is a bit of a hitch in his plan. One of his secretaries, a girl named Kai, is considered to be a failure and ends up being discarded. She's eventually found by the people of Vie De Marli and taken in by the island's inhabitants, the Protectors. This is the same group that once worked alongside Sparta to steal Argosax away in the past. Their leader, Mathieu, adopts the girl, and since she has no memory of her past, she is given a new name, Lucia. When Arius begins making moves that the Protectors can't handle on their own, they decide to reach out for help and send Lucia to find Dante. To convince him, Mathieu offers to share some of Sparta's history, which is more than enough to get Dante interested. From there, he heads to Vie De Marli and starts cutting his way through Arius's forces as he works towards stopping him. But despite all of that, Arius still manages to gather everything he needs to open a portal to Argosax's domain. Dante does eventually confront and defeat Arius, but by that point, the damage is already done. The portal has been opened and Argosax is beginning to break through. So, realizing that there's no other way to stop it, he suggests going into the demon world himself to deal with the problem directly, fully aware that once he goes in, it is likely that he is not coming back. Lucia obviously isn't on board with that plan, and the two settle things with a coin toss. It flips heads, which means Lucia has no choice but to allow Dante to sacrifice himself. While he dives into the demon world, Lucia stays behind and ends up fighting Arius again, but this time he has been transformed after absorbing part of Argosax's power. Even so, she manages to defeat him on her own, and after the fight, she finds Dante's coin, which has two heads, meaning that he had rigged things so that he would be allowed to sacrifice himself for her without her complaining. Meanwhile, on the other side, Dante confronts Argosax directly and manages to kill him. But with no clear way back to the human world, he chooses to venture deeper into the demon realm instead. Eventually though, he does manage to find another portal back and makes his way home. With everything resolved, Lucia returns to Vie De Marli, where she continues to protect the island, while Dante goes right back to hunting demons. Eventually, Dante gets pulled into another job through Lady after she runs into a group known as the Angelos, which are a group of knights who have been collecting devil arms. Tracking their origins leads her straight to Fortuna and to the Order of the Sword, and once the connection is made, Trish makes a plan to go undercover using the alias Gloria, with the goal of figuring out exactly why the Order is stockpiling demonic artifacts in the first place. It doesn't take long for her to work her way up through the ranks, especially after presenting them with the Sparda sword. From there, she uncovers the truth about the Order, and that they were originally formed after Sparta sealed the Hellgate in Fortuna using Yamato. But over time, their mission began to shift. Instead of just defending the city against demons, they had become completely obsessed with eradicating demons altogether. So much so that they had begun creating artificial demons of their own, including the Angelos. But they weren't stopping there. The Order had also constructed a massive demonic statue called the Savior and modeled it after Sparta, with the idea being that if they could acquire both Sparta's blood and his sword, they would be able to bring it to life, control it, and effectively create a weapon powerful enough to wipe out all of demonkind. To facilitate that, they started opening smaller hellgates to gather demonic energy and materials. But those gates also acted as bait, as they knew that there was no way that Dante could ignore a city that was constantly being attacked by demons forever. And the Order was correct about that. Once Trish explained the situation, both Dante and Lady head straight for Fortuna, and Dante wastes absolutely no time in making an entrance. crashing through the ceiling during a church sermon and taking out the Order's leader, Sanctus, which also makes a hell of a first impression on Nero, who, as a reminder, is Vergil's son. So, let's play catch up with him for a moment. At some point prior to all of this, he had fought off a large group of demons in the Midas Forest, and in that battle, both he and Kyrie were injured. Even his sword, Red Queen, was damaged badly enough that it needed to be sent away for repairs. While Kyrie eventually recovered, Nero didn't. Instead of healing, his shoulder transformed into a demonic arm called the Devil Bringer. Along with making Nero incredibly strong, it also allowed him to project a spectral arm, and even lets him interact with and absorb demonic energy. But that power comes at a cost, and ever since it awakened, Nero had begun hearing a voice that constantly pushed him to seek out power. Back to the main story though, when Dante kills Sanctus, Nero steps in to stop him, while Credo focuses on getting Kyrie to safety. The two fight briefly, and Nero is ultimately forced to reveal his demonic arm, and with it, he pushes Dante back and even impales him on his own sword against a statue of Sparta. However, Dante frees himself without much effort and drops back down as if nothing happened. Nero questions what exactly he's dealing with, but Dante just pulls rebellion out of himself and explains that they're actually not so different, adding that the knights that he had killed were demons and not humans, so it shouldn't be such a big deal. Nero is pretty unsure of how to process that, obviously, and the hesitation gives Dante enough time to leave. Not long after, Kyrie returns Nero's sword now that it has fully been repaired, and Credo orders him to follow Dante towards Fortuna Castle. Before Nero can act on that, however, the city is suddenly overrun by demons. While Credo and Kyrie focus on evacuating civilians, Nero stays behind to deal with the invasion on his own. At the same time, Sanctus is secretly revived through the Order's Ascension ceremony after being infused with demonic power. While the process often leaves participants either unstable or physically changed, Sanctus came out of it largely unaffected, aside from becoming way more powerful. Anyways, Nero continues through Fortuna as he hunts for Dante and eventually makes his way to the village at the base of Limina Peak. Here he discovers the source of the demonic outbreak, which is the first Hellgate, where he confronts and defeats Betrayal, the conqueror of the Fire Hell. From there, Nero pushes forward through a relentless blizzard and reaches Fortuna Castle, where he encounters Trish in disguise as Gloria, who he believes to be a high-ranking member of the Order that he just happens to have never met before. As he continues deeper into the castle, he finds a second Hellgate and is forced to battle Baal, yet another massive demon, this time being able to control ice. After defeating it, Nero uncovers a hidden underground laboratory operated by the Order. Inside, he comes face to face with Agnes, the Order's chief alchemist, who explains that he created the Hellgates in order to summon demons for experimentation. He also reveals to Nero that Sanctus has already been revived, and that the Order intends to use the power that they've gathered to control the Savior and reshape the world under their rule. Agnes then sends his Angelos after Nero to kill him, so that his Devil Bringer can be studied, and this time they manage to catch him off guard and pin him to the wall. But just as it looks like Nero is dead to rights, his Devil Trigger activates, resonating with Yamato and restoring the blade before it's pulled into his hand. With that, Nero breaks free and vows that he will gladly become a demon if it means he becomes strong enough to save Kyrie. In the face of this new power, Agnes is forced to reveal his own Angelo form before making his escape, and Nero then heads towards the Order's headquarters to look for Credo in hopes of finally getting some real answers about what's been going on. However, Agnes arrives first, and outs Nero as a devil to the Order. This causes Sanctus to order Credo to arrest Nero and take back Yamato, while Gloria is sent to deal with Dante. However, once they're alone, Agnes suggests that Sanctus should use Kyrie as leverage to maintain control of the situation. Not long after, Nero and Credo meet at the entrance of the Order. Nero tries to get the truth out of him, but Credo immediately attacks, and they each need to show off their hidden abilities, Nero's being the Devil Bringer, and Credo revealing his Angelo form. Even with that power though, Nero manages to get the upper hand and ultimately defeats his friend. However, just when the fight ends, Kyrie arrives and sees Nero standing over Credo with a demonic arm, and naturally, she assumes the worst. Nero tries to explain, but Agnes steps in and twists the situation, convincing her that Nero is the real threat before taking Kyrie hostage and revealing the plan to use her as leverage moving forward. With that all out in the open, Credo realizes what's been happening and turns against Sanctus by forming a temporary alliance with Nero. Even so, they split up for the time being. While Credo sets out to uncover the truth for himself, Nero goes after Agnes in an attempt to rescue Kyrie. This time, he is just about to defeat Agnes in battle, but at the last moment, Sanctus arrives alongside an army of Bianco Angelos to pull Agnes out of danger and once again takes Kyrie with them. Nero does everything he can to stop them, but in the end, the only thing he is able to hold on to is her necklace. Soon, Nero runs into Dante yet again, and this time Dante explains that he wants to take Yamato back since it belonged to his brother. However, Nero refuses, and the two fight once again. Despite having Yamato and even managing to disarm Dante during the fight, Nero is ultimately overpowered and beaten by a bare-handed Dante. After which, Dante acknowledges Nero's resolve and explains that the battle was just a means to test and guide him. Although he originally intended to take the sword back, he now decides to let Nero keep it, at least for the time being. Finally, before parting, the two finally exchange names as a show of mutual respect, or at least, basic human-demon decency. As Nero leaves, Trish catches up to Dante and drops the Gloria disguise as she questions whether it's really a good idea to leave Yamato in Nero's hands. But Dante doesn't seem too concerned. As if Nero causes any problems, he can always just kick his ass again. Ironically, mirroring what Vergil said about taking his amulet before the events of Devil May Cry 3. Regardless, Nero finally makes it to Sanctus and finds him atop the Savior, with Kyrie being trapped in a gem on the statue's head. Sanctus offers Nero the chance to surrender and join Kyrie as part of the Savior's core, but Nero refuses. However, despite his best efforts, he is quickly trapped all the same, allowing Sanctus to take Yamato back. This is finally when Greedo arrives and attacks his former leader, which goes great for all of about 10 seconds until Sanctus kills him with Yamato. As Greedo falls from the Savior, Dante catches him and, along with Trish, witnesses Nero being absorbed into the Savior's core. With the blood of Sparta now inside of it, the colossal statue awakens and begins its march towards Fortuna. And with his dying breath, Greedo asks Dante to save both Kyrie and Nero. Meanwhile, Agnes had reclaimed Yamato from Sanctus and used it to open the true Hellgate, which had been sealed by Sparta in the ancient past. This floods Fortuna with demons, which is part of Sanctus's plan. With the citizens in danger, he uses the Savior to wipe the demons out, essentially establishing himself as the new savior of the city. As it turns out, though, entrusting Yamato to Agnes was Sanctus's greatest mistake. Dante catches up to him, and they have a very dramatic conversation. Dante beats his buggy butt, and finally kills Agnes before taking back his brother's sword, once again using it to close the Hellgate in the process. And with that, he can confront Sanctus and the Savior. He drives Yamato into its core, shooting several bullets into the sword to drive it deeper and deeper into the Savior until it plunges directly into the heart-like organ inside, which Nero is imprisoned in. That frees his nephew, and Nero begins searching through the Savior's interior before finally facing Sanctus directly. But while Nero now has Yamato, Sanctus has the Sparda sword. And he taunts Nero for betraying the Order and mocks him for allowing himself to fall into a trap because of love. The two fight, and Nero ultimately comes out on top. And as a last-ditch effort, Sanctus calls on the power of the Sparda sword, demanding the strength to finish the fight, but nothing happens. Confused and angry, he questions why the sword refuses him, and Nero explains that Sparda had been a demon, but he had a heart capable of love, which Sanctus lacks. And without that, the sword will never work for him. With that realization, Nero finishes the fight, killing Sanctus and freeing Kyrie. The two escape and the Savior begins to collapse. However, just as things seem to be over, the statue reactivates and transforms into the false Savior, now taking on Sanctus's likeness rather than Sparda's. At first, Dante is going to step in to deal with it, but Nero stops him as he wants to deal with it himself. And with that, he finally accepts the demonic power that he had been struggling with this entire time, and the Devil Bringer he was cursed with suddenly becomes the tool that gives him the strength to protect Fortuna. He extends a massive spectral arm outward and crushes the false Savior, and in an instant the conflict is over. From there, Dante leaves Fortuna and entrusts Yamato to Nero, who absorbs the blade back into his arm. And while the city is still in ruins and the demons haven't disappeared entirely, at the very least, he is finally able to move forward with Kyrie. Now, with Devil May Cry 4 behind us, we can move into the lead-up to Devil May Cry 5, starting with the prequel novel Before the Nightmare, as well as the introduction of Nell Goldstein's granddaughter, Nico. And as a heads up, this section also overlaps with the Visions of V manga, which follows V's perspective during this same time period. So, about 5 years after the destruction of Fortuna, Nico tracks down a journalist named Jeffrey Turner who had previously written about the incident in an article for the Occult Times. While his report wasn't entirely accurate, Nico sees that a surprising amount of it actually lines up with what really happened. Jeffrey explains that when he tried to investigate the Order of the Sword further, most of the locals refused to cooperate, leaving him to rely on low-ranking members of the group who had already begun questioning the Order's beliefs. During their conversation, Nico points out a man in one of the article's photos, and after some hesitation, Jeffrey says that the man is named Nero. And speaking of which, back in Fortuna, he is in the middle of repairing the Red Queen once again, when one of the orphans that he and Kyrie look after tell him that Nico is looking for him. While he is immediately cautious when they first meet, his Devilbringer doesn't detect anything particularly threatening, so he does hear her out. That said, her attitude doesn't exactly help, and the conversation quickly turns tense. Nico explains that she is searching for the Order's missing research on demons, and asks for Nero's help, making it clear that she already knows far more about the subject than an average outsider. Nero, though, isn't really interested and refused to get involved, until she tells him that Agnes was her father. He doesn't believe her right away, but when she manages to easily repair the Red Queen for him, she earns a bit more trust and Nero eventually agrees to help. The two head back to Agnes's old laboratory where Nero asks what she actually plans to do with the research. She explains that she is a weapons artist and mentions that her grandmother was Nell Goldstein, who, as a reminder, is the gunsmith who made ebony and ivory for Dante. And speaking of Dante, Nico begins to ask if he is a good person and treating her grandmother's weapons with respect, which makes Nero a little bit uneasy since Dante was the one who killed her dad. After that, they return to Nero and Kyrie's home, and Nico ends up staying with them for a while she continues gathering information. That said, she and Nero constantly butt heads and argue, mostly over her smoking and general shitty attitude. Eventually, Nico explains that learning what her father had been doing pushed her to study demons and develop her skills as a weaponsmith, making it clear that she doesn't hold Nero or Dante responsible for what happened to Agnes, and instead just wants to move forward and help however she can. Meanwhile, Dante returns to Vie De Marli and reunites with Mathieu, who immediately calls him out for not visiting since he helped them take down Arius. She then tells him that Balrog, Argosax's former right-hand man, right-hand fire demon, has resurfaced and grown too powerful for Lucia to handle on her own. So Dante and Lucia set out together and try and take the demon down. But during the fight, Dante notices a fragment of Yamato is embedded in the Balrog's fist, which he knows that he needs to destroy before it can be used to hurt innocent people. Lucia ends up watching the battle from the sidelines and starts to compare herself to Dante and wishes that she could repay him more for being so helpful. Dante eventually succeeds in destroying the Yamato fragment, but Cerberus is also destroyed in the process. However, the demon isn't completely down yet, and the fight continues until Balrog realizes that Dante is Sparda's son, as well as the one who defeated both Mundus and Argosax. At which point, he realizes that fighting is pointless and willingly submits and becomes a devil arm for Dante to use going forward. Soon, Dante leaves the island once again, and Lucia is left thinking about how oblivious he is to how she really feels about him. About a year passes with Nico living with Nero and Kyrie in Fortuna, and during this time she begins working on restoring the Devil May Cry van with the goal of helping Nero travel more easily between jobs so that he can actually start making money. One night, while Nico is having dinner with Kyrie and the orphans, they hear a brutal scream from Nero in the garage. When they rush to check on him, they find that his Devilbringer has been ripped off of his body, and a cloaked man is escaping from the area. And seeing this, Nico assumes that whoever did it was likely trying to take Yamato's power from Nero. But who is this mystery man? Well, for that, we gotta look back to the demon world. For over a decade, Vergil had either been trapped there or being corrupted as Nello Angelo. After Mundus's defeat, he finally had the opportunity to escape, but by that time, his body had begun to deteriorate. Constant battles and repeated defeats had left him crumbling, and by the time he returned to the human world, he had barely enough strength to hold himself together. And so he rushed to Fortuna to reclaim Yamato by force, and ripped Nero's Devilbringer away to retrieve it. With the sword back in his possession, he opened a portal back to his childhood home, and drives Yamato through his own body, separating his human and demonic halves. With that, Vergil divides himself into the demonic half, Urizen, and the human half, Vergil, who for most of the story going forward will be going by V to keep his identity hidden. From that moment, both try to become stronger in different ways. In V's case, his body is weak and vulnerable, so he seeks to reunite with Urizen and restore himself. Meanwhile, Urizen wants to become stronger by consuming the Qlifoth fruit, which is the same object which once allowed Mundus to rise to power in the demon world. But our focus for now is V. After being created, V is completely overwhelmed by fear of Urizen's power, and in an attempt to ground himself, he clings to a book of poetry that once belonged to Vergil as a way of surviving. However, the split doesn't just create V and Urizen. Aside from the two halves that Vergil split himself into, there are also 3 other beings that were created: Griffin, Shadow, and Nightmare. These are familiars who would act to keep V alive. The first one he meets is Griffin, who pulls him to safety and forms a contract with him in exchange for saving his life. Griffin goes on to explain that he is the manifestation of Vergil's memories from his time as Nello Angelo, and that without a host to anchor himself to, he would eventually fade away, and so keeping V alive becomes a necessity for his own survival as well. Not long after, they are attacked by an Empusa, and at first Griffin is able to hold it off, but he becomes exhausted and V needs to drag him to safety and takes refuge in a nearby antique shop. There he grabs a cane and for the first time manages to kill a demon by himself, which as it turns out is actually a requirement for demon slaying for them. Griffin explains that he exists more or less like a manifested dream, and he can't make lasting changes to the world like killing something else. As they continue, V begins seeing fragments of Vergil's past, and this time they are specifically memories of his time being tortured under Mundus. Griffin believes that another familiar that is tied to those memories is nearby, and if they don't find them quickly, they'll probably disappear. So following that lead, they soon encounter a shadow-like figure that shifts its form to attack. V manages to defend himself until it takes on the shape of a jaguar, which manages to escape from V while also taking his cane. By the time they track it down, the creature is on death's door. However, before they can approach it, they are threatened by Phantom. V attempts to form a contract, offering the creature a chance to survive, but it refuses, rejecting the idea of serving someone that they see as weak. And so a fight breaks out where V is severely outclassed. While he does manage to avoid being killed, he also grabs the weakened jaguar and retreats. He then offers an alliance with Shadow, and the cat agrees to join him. It takes on V's appearance and runs out into the open, drawing Phantom's attention, and as Phantom attacks, the illusion drops and Shadow strikes back, creating just enough of an opening for V to step in and drive his cane into Phantom's core. With that, the battle ends, and having proved himself, he earns Shadow's respect, and the two finally form a contract together. With that resolved, V asks if there are any other powerful demons nearby, and Griffin leads them to a nearby church. Inside, they encounter a massive, unstable mass of demonic energy, which is Nightmare. Griffin explains that the original Nightmare had the potential to destroy the entire demon world, but lacked the will to act on that power. This version, however, does not have that limitation. Nightmare overpowers both Griffin and Shadow almost instantly before cutting off V's escape and leaving him completely exposed. Soon, V is dragged into the abyss within Nightmare's body, where it is forced to relive more of Vergil's past, and eventually, a Nello Angelo arrives and floods him with even more memories. However, Dante soon appears within this vision and defeats Nello Angelo, but instead of relief, V just feels even more frustrated at his own weakness. Even in this memory world, he was pathetic, and so he reaches into Nightmare, seizes its core, and forces his way back out of it. Once free, Griffin urges him to destroy Nightmare, warning that it can't be controlled. But V takes a different approach, and instead of killing it, he returns the core and declares himself its master. And after a brief moment, Nightmare stops resisting and accepts the contract. With all 3 familiars now under his control, he uses Nightmare to take out a group of approaching demons and kills them instantly. However, doing so pushes V too far and he collapses. While unconscious, V finds himself reliving yet another memory from his childhood inside Sparta's home. There he thinks about how Nightmare might have enough power to rival Urizen, however his own condition prevents him from sustaining it long enough to actually fight him. And this makes it clear that as things stand, he doesn't have what he needs to succeed. And in this moment of depression, he begins to wonder if there was even a single moment of Vergil's life that was worth holding on to, and starts to understand why he was removed in the first place. Within the dream, Yamato soon appears in front of V though, but a barrier stands in his way before he can reach it, reflecting Dante's smiling face onto himself. However, before he can interrogate him and get any answers from Dante, the dream shatters, and when he wakes up, Griffin makes it clear that V can't allow himself to reach that level of exhaustion ever again. When he collapses, his familiars disappear along with him, which means that they won't be able to protect him while he's out. So, realizing that he can't handle this alone, V decides that the only option left is to find Dante and ask for help. However, he does want to keep his true identity secret, and so he officially takes on the name V based on the insignia on Vergil's poetry book. He then chooses to contact Dante indirectly through J.D. Morrison, keeping as much distance between them as possible to keep this illusion going. And with that, we arrive at the point where the Visions of V manga and the Devil May Cry 5 game fully overlap. At the Devil May Cry office, Dante accepts a job from V, while Morrison heads out to bring Lady and Trish in on the mission. Vie explains that he needs Dante to stop the resurrection of a powerful demon, though Dante doesn't take the warning too seriously at first, at which point Vie calls their target Dante's reason for fighting and tells Dante that the demon's name is Vergil. Again, he doesn't believe this, but Vie tells him that when Redgrave City is overrun by demons, there will be no doubt anymore. Meanwhile, at Lady's Motel, she and Morrison are watching a news report covering the sudden appearance of a massive tree in Redgrave City. Morrison explains that Dante and Trish are already on their way to deal with whatever's at the center of it, and insists that Lady joins them. She accepts and begins thinking about the engraving on Dante's gun, which says Redgrave, and she begins wondering how he is tied to this location. Before long, the group of Vie, Dante, Trish, Lady, and Morrison all arrive in Redgrave City. By this point, the Qlipoth tree has already grown to the point that it is towering over everything around it. As they move into the city, Lady asks for the name of the demon that they are going to be dealing with. Dante defers the question to Vie, who answers with a different name this time, being Urizen, which lets them avoid explaining the truth for the time being. As they approach the Qlipoth, the sheer pressure of Urizen's power overwhelms them and Vie struggles to even move forward. For a moment he hesitates, but Griffin snaps him out of it, and Dante notices him falling behind and calls out, telling him that there's no shame in stepping back if he needs to. And after a brief pause, Vie agrees and leaves. Instead of continuing forward, he decides to bring in Nero. Even in his current condition, Vie recognizes that his connection to Sparta's bloodline must make him valuable, so he arranges for Morrison's helicopter to retrieve him from Fortuna. By the time Nero wakes up, he finds Vie already in his room, and rather than forcing his way in, Vie calmly explains that he entered through the window, and if he had any intention of harming him, he already would have done so. He then goes on to say that he is a devil hunter pursuing the same demon that took Nero's arm, and that while he had already hired Dante, the situation is more dangerous than expected, so he would like Nero's assistance in Redgrave City. Vie and Nero make their way back to the Qlipoth, arriving just in time to find Dante already fighting with Urizen. And even when Nero jumps in to help, Urizen completely controls the battle. Realizing that they can't win, Dante makes the decision to hold Urizen off, while the others retreat, and as Vie pulls Nero away, the path behind them collapses, cutting off any chance of going back to help him. By this point, the Qlipoth has continued to grow, spreading its roots and tendrils throughout the city, and attacking anything within reach. Nero wants to stay and keep fighting, but Vie forces him to face the reality that in their current condition, they don't stand a chance. They would only die without changing anything. And to make matters worse, according to Vie, the world only has about a month left before everything is destroyed, and so if there is any chance of stopping it, Nero will need to become stronger very quickly. With that, Nero returns to Fortuna to train, while Vie remains behind in Redgrave City, doing what he can to help civilians as his body continues to deteriorate. Meanwhile, Dante's fight with Urizen is over quickly. Rebellion is shattered, and Dante is knocked unconscious as Urizen continues his ascent. It is nearly a month later when Vie finds Dante still just barely hanging on to life while searching for Sparda's sword. He uses the weapon to wake Dante up, and when he regains consciousness, Dante takes the sword and demands they solve the Urizen problem without Nero getting involved. And so they continue through the Qlipoth, and Dante encounters Cavalier Angelo, defeats him, and frees Trish, who had been trapped inside of it. After leaving her behind to recover, he continues deeper and eventually arrives at the ruins of his childhood home, where he awakens his Sin Devil trigger. With that power, Dante returns to the Qlipoth and reunites with the others, just to learn that Urizen has already reached the top of the tree. Things have actually become so desperate that Nero needs to join the mission once again as well, and the group splits into two paths. Dante takes one of them alone, while Nero and Vie take the other together. Dante is the one who reaches Urizen first and finds him within an illusion of their childhood home. And here he finally tells his brother the truth about their mother and how she died trying to search for Vergil during the demon's attack. However, his brother is too far gone and Urizen dismisses it entirely, just saying that the only thing that matters now is gaining more power. And to prove that point, he consumes the Qlipoth fruit and gains ungodly strength. However, even in this new form, he is defeated by Dante anyways. By the time that Nero and Vie arrive, Urizen is already on the verge of death, and at that point, Dante confirms that Urizen is in fact his brother, and it's here that Vie steps forward and offers to finish things himself. However, rather than killing him when he drives his cane into Urizen, the two reunite and become Vergil once again. Dante challenges Vergil to yet another fight, but this time Vergil refuses, telling Dante to recover and grow stronger before they settle things properly. Once again, Dante tries to keep Nero out of it, but Nero refuses and points out that Vergil used him, and that he blames Dante for allowing him to keep Yamato in the first place. This forces Dante's hand, and he needs to tell Nero the truth, that Vergil is his father. Dante makes it clear that Vergil needs to be stopped, but he doesn't want Nero to be the one who is forced to do it, and so he leaves his nephew behind to process everything while he heads off to confront Vergil by himself. At the top of the Qliphoth, Dante demands Yamato, but Vergil refuses, and the two prepare to fight once again. Then, just as Dante revealed the truth to Nero, he also tells his brother that Nero is his son. This does briefly catch Vergil off guard, but it's not enough to stop him, and so they both activate their Sin Devil triggers and prepare to attack. But before they can, Nero steps in, unlocking his own True Devil trigger and in the process, diving in to stop the fight entirely. Dante tries to tell him to stay out of it, but Nero pushes him aside and makes it clear that this is something he has to handle himself. Finally, Dante allows him to fight. In the end, Nero defeats his father, but there's no time to process it, and with it, the threat to the human world is nearly stopped as well. However, there is one final thing that needs to happen. Dante and Vergil both make the decision to enter the demon world and destroy the roots from the other side, knowing that they likely won't be able to return. However, Dante explains that he is able to do this without worrying because he can leave the human world in Nero's capable hands. Once inside the demon world, they manage to destroy the remaining roots, and with no way back, they begin competing to see who can fight off the most demons, with the brothers still being rivals but no longer hating each other. Finally, back in the human world, Nero reunites with Nico, and they begin heading back towards Fortuna. Along the way, she asks how he feels about saving Dante, knowing that Dante once killed his father. But Nero brushes it off, saying that it doesn't matter as the Sparta twins are gone now. Though, as he looks back at the collapsing Qliphoth, he hopes that one day they will return. And with that, we have hit the end of the main universe for at least the time being. However, we also have the Netflix continuity as well now, which we can get into here. The story is largely the same in terms of setup, but things are a little bit different here. In the original timeline, Sparta defected and then sealed the portals between the worlds, like Temen Nigru and Fortuna's portal. However, in this timeline, we gotta go back a little bit. Argosax wasn't a rival warlord to Mundus, he was his predecessor, who ruled the demon realm Makai through chaos and wanton destruction. Eventually, Mundus, who had been one of Argosax's high priests, saw this to be wasteful and a foolish way to lead, and so he betrayed Argosax. He created an army with Sparda at his right hand, and they ultimately managed to usurp him, and with his destruction, 4 Arcana artifacts were cast into the human world. But as Mundus became more powerful, he also became more paranoid that those around him would betray him. He started killing his own subjects, and soon Sparda spoke out against him. When Mundus refused to be reasoned with, Sparda then challenged him, and during their battle he created a barrier dividing the worlds to keep Mundus in check, using his own blood, an amulet, and his sword as the key to it. And that is correct. This time there's also no priestess blood being involved, making Lady and Arkham a little bit less connected than the initial story. Notably, even with the barrier in place though, small and random portals do appear from time to time between the worlds, and smaller demons can pass through sporadically. But with that said, we're going to jump ahead quite a bit here to about 670 years before the events of the Netflix series. At this point, a young boy named Arius is being raised by a heavily abusive and heavily drunken father, until one day he chooses to kill him and set himself free. Arius lives the rest of his life becoming disillusioned by the ruling class and those in power, until one day he finds one of the Arcana artifacts. This staff connects him with Argosax, who promises that they can work together to create a better world, a world without limitations where chaos rules rather than corrupt humans. To that end, he gifts Arius with demonic magic and makes it so that whenever he dies, he will immediately be reincarnated along with all of his former memories and abilities. Now, moving forward another 650 years or so, and we finally reach the time where Dante, Vergil, Mary, and the White Rabbit were children. When it comes to Dante and Vergil, their childhood was actually quite a bit different. In the original story, they had been raised by Sparta until he died mysteriously, but in the Netflix series, neither of them had ever even met their father. They effectively trained each other through sparring and playing games. However, Vergil was often one step behind his brother in just about anything they ever did. Otherwise, each brother still gets half the amulet from Eva, and demons eventually attack, though this time Vergil is at home when it happens. Actually, he wakes up first when they arrive, and when the initial attack wakes up Eva, she quickly grabs Dante, who is the only brother that she can find at the time, and runs out looking for Vergil as well, though she misses him in the chaos. However, to Vergil, it just looks like she is running away from him. Vergil soon finds his mother dead on the floor with Dante nowhere in sight, and then gets kidnapped by Mundus' soldiers, who are pretending to be members of Ouroboros. They torture him constantly, burn him alive, starve him, break his bones, and then let him heal just to do it again. But then, after he had suffered enough, Mundus calls Vergil to him and places the blame on Argosax and the Ouroboros, going on to claim that Sparda was his ally and he simply wanted to save his old friend's son. To that end, he binds and gags the demons who had been torturing Vergil, gives the boy Yamato, and has him slaughter them all before letting them explain the truth. And finally, he offers Vergil the opportunity to become powerful, to teach him to take on a Machian form and never hurt like he had been again in exchange for Vergil's allegiance. He was put through brutal and intense training against Mundus and his soldiers for decades until any emotion, care, or sentimentality was beaten out of him, and only a desire to become stronger remained. As for Dante, he believes that he saw his brother die, and goes on to live his life feeling extremely guilty about not being able to stop things. On to Mary, and her family is attacked by a demon at a subway station. Her father freezes in fear, but they are luckily saved when the demon is hit by a train. This early incident inspires the young Mary to become a demon hunter, and she begins playing games with a young boy who imagines that they're killing monsters together. However, her father Arkham becomes obsessed after the subway demon. He tries to warn the authorities about what he saw, but no one believes him, and soon he begins to experiment on himself to gain demonic strength out of the shame he felt for not helping his family when he was needed. Unfortunately, he eventually succeeds, becoming a demon in the process, and attacks and eats Mary's mother in front of her. Mary tries to fight back, but he swats her away, knocking over a burner and starting a massive house fire. She manages to make it out and believes that she watches her father burn to death inside. However, that is not the case. Interestingly enough, as she believes that Arkham is dead, she never actually sets off on her vendetta to kill him at this point and never throws away her name to disconnect herself from him either, and so she keeps going by Mary for the time being. That all brings us to 9 years ago when a then Senator Baines comes across Lady fighting off a demon on her own. He tells her that she will likely be blamed for the deaths that the demons caused, and offers to hire her as a demon hunter instead so that she can take revenge against demons rather than just being a scapegoat for one. Eventually, she is recruited by Dark Realm Command, or Darkcom as their publicists insist they get called, which is a government defense agency led by Ouroboros that specifically takes in orphans and trains them to hunt demons. And finally, we have the White Rabbit. He was a human child who was abused and beaten by his family, and only found comfort in reading his copy of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. One night, the boy follows a bright light in an alley, which becomes a portal to the demon realm. Since Sparta had sealed off the two realms 2,000 years ago, Mundus had gone on to wage unending wars against his own people and purposely destroyed the lands. Food ran short, the air turned to poison, and every Machian suffered under his conquest. This is the world that the boy arrived in, and after being chased by a monster, he finds his way to a small village where he is taken in and raised alongside other Machian children. He quickly found the home that he never had in the human realm, and one day he and his new friends are out playing when he comes across a strange glowing gem. However, things would quickly go downhill for him. The poisonous Aaron Mackay finally wore down one of his young friends, and they pass away as a result. Their funeral acts as a turning point for the rabbit, and he begins working towards preventing that kind of loss from happening again in the future. It took years of effort, but using the gem that he found, he made a machine that could open small portals between Mackay and the human world. He began bringing refugees across the border between worlds, and for a time, this worked great. However, one excursion went very wrong. A monstrous demon found the group before they could make it across, and the refugees raced through the portal, but when they arrived on the other side, they were surrounded by Darkcom soldiers. At first, they began slaughtering the demons, but Mary holds back the attack for a moment when she notices a human was guiding them. However, when the giant demon that had been chasing the refugees reaches its jaws through the portal, it scares Darkcom to the point that they blow up the entire building, with the White Rabbit and his refugee friends still inside. Despite this, the man ends up surviving, though he is very badly injured and surrounded by the corpses of his dead colleagues. As a result, he loses his mind and begins to obsess with the idea of taking revenge on Darkcom. He starts to investigate the group and learn any and all of their potential weaknesses so that he could one day destroy the entire organization. At the same time, he started experimenting on himself, creating an artificial heart that pumped demon blood through his body, which not only kept him alive, but also enhanced his speed and strength far beyond what normal humans were capable of. And finally, he created a rabbit-like mask and sewed it directly onto his face, finally becoming the White Rabbit. From this point on, rather than helping other Machians escape hell, He began forcing more into the human world. The strong would be forced to become his soldiers, and those who were weak would be experimented on and transformed so that they could eventually assist in his mission anyways. He did, however, spare families, but only under strict conditions, as they were unable to leave the apartments he placed them in. That all said, he wasn't entirely on his own on this. At some point, he's approached by Nello Angelo, who is actually Vergil in disguise, who under Mundus's orders gives him one half of the perfect amulet and informs him of Dante's true identity as the son of Sparda. And together, they begin working on a plan to tear down Sparta's barrier once and for all. The first step of which was to break into the Vatican City Museum and steal Sparta's sword, the Force Edge. To accomplish this, he hires a group of mercenaries that made their way into the museum, and once the security systems are out of the way, he appears himself, slaughtering all of the soldiers, and announcing his plan to find a demon hunter and bring the apocalypse. In the aftermath of the attack, the US government begins coordinating a response and brings in Darkcom scientist Dr. Fisher under the recommendation of Vice President Baines. As such, they take two courses of action. First is sending a squad of soldiers to kill the rabbit, however, he slaughters all but one of them, being a man named Anders, who becomes a double agent for him. Second, they begin to call in any and all possible leads on the rabbit, and soon bring in Enzo Ferrino, who, just as he was in the main continuity, is Dante's information broker. Through their questioning, Baines and Fisher realize that the White Rabbit can't break the barrier without Sparta's amulet, which had been divided into two halves. Not only that, but thanks to Enzo, they also learn that the demon hunter that the rabbit was looking for was actually Dante, and that he likely has the other half of the amulet. At the same time, Dante is dealing with a shape-shifting demon called Plasma. It first tries to fool him by appearing as a baby, and then when that doesn't work, it returns as his brother Vergil, but even so, Dante manages to defeat the demon and protects his amulet. However, Plasma isn't the only one making moves for the amulet. Baines hires mercenaries to take it from Dante, and they ambush him at his home, though none of them really stand out much as a threat to him. Once most of them are dealt with, Mary takes point and actually manages to go toe-to-toe with Dante, and she assumes that he might be a demon when she sees his strength and healing abilities. To test this theory, she lands a shot with an anti-demon bullet, which explodes when it makes contact with Dante. However, it doesn't actually kill him instantly, which suggests that Dante is actually a hybrid between demon and human. This is all news to Dante though, who just thinks that he's a regular old superhero, and has no clue about his demonic origins or the importance of his amulet. Ultimately, Lady wins the fight and manages to capture Dante and take him back to Darkcom headquarters as a prisoner, where he is questioned and where Dr. Fisher examines his amulet. Baines tells Dante that if he cooperates with the government, he can be cleansed of his demonic blood, but at this point, Dante still just believes that he's a superhero and that he doesn't really need cleansing. However, before the convoy can arrive at headquarters, the rabbit calls on a swarm of demons to attack them. This includes Plasma, Echidna, Agni, Rudra, and Cavalier Angelo. And in the chaos, he manages to take Dante's half of the amulet and combines it with the half that Nello Angelo gave him as well. However, despite having the completed amulet and Sparta's sword, the rabbit doesn't tear down the barrier, leading Fisher to believe that there must be some other component that is still missing, which he figures out right before the rabbit kills him and injures Anders. At one point during this fight, one of Darkcom's soldiers manages to land a demon-killing bullet into the rabbit, however, nothing happens, leaving them to believe that he must be a higher caliber demon than any that they had seen before, as they don't know he is a human yet. Soon, he sends Plasma back to the Darkcom soldiers so that he can kidnap and impersonate one of them and gain access to their systems. The rabbit then takes Enzo hostage while the demons make their escape, as Dante follows them on a motorcycle. Several of the demons attack him at once, hoping to bring out Dante's devil trigger for the rabbit, but just before he can, a bomb which Darkcom implanted into his neck explodes when he reaches outside of their maximum range and nearly kills Dante on the spot. Dante and Enzo are recaptured alongside Vice President Baines and bound onto a plane. Here, Baines begins preaching about the greater service that Dante could serve in God's plan until the White Rabbit interrupts, finally revealing that Dante is the son of Sparda. From here, he needs to fight both Agni and Rudra on the plane. They nearly kill him, and as he's on the ground, he begins remembering his mother telling him how his father was the greatest warrior who ever lived, who had always done all he could to protect the weak, and in that moment, Dante finally awakens his devil trigger and manages to overpower and kill Agni. This makes Rudra lash out and causes the plane to explode. As they fall, Dante uses his new form to save Enzo, Baines, and the remaining hostages from the plane, carrying each of them to safety, and once they crash, he continues his fight with Rudra. But before continuing from there, we gotta go back a little bit, because as Dante is learning to embrace his demonic side, Darkham walks right into the rabbit's headquarters and a trap. Cavalier and Echidna are roaming the halls and cutting through agents, and after just about all of her colleagues have been killed, Mary is sprayed by a hallucinogenic gas that causes her to see various visions of her father, as well as the comrades that she has lost. Even so, she manages to keep moving and avoids Cavalier when one of the families that the rabbit has trapped in the building secretly hides her away. However, the situation shifts the moment that she realizes that they aren't human. At first, she is about to kill them, as she has done to every demon she's met so far. However, she actually lets them explain that they are refugees being held against their will by the rabbit, and that those who weren't prisoners were forced to be test subjects or soldiers. Hearing this, and being saved by the Makaians, causes her to begin reevaluating her perspective, and so she lets the family live and moves on towards recovering the amulet herself. Soon she comes across a hidden lab filled with the rabbit's experiments, demons that are cut apart, stitched together, and enhanced to become his tools. And this all but confirms what the Makaians had told her. As she continues to explore, she finds what she believes to be one of her surviving agents. However, it is actually Plasma in disguise. Luckily, he blows his cover when he calls the demon world by its actual name, Makai, but even realizing that it was an imposter, Mary is caught off guard and bargains for her own survival, offering Plasma a new identity with higher clearance if he keeps her alive. However, Echidna attacks moments later, not having seen Plasma turn into Mary and leaving him paralyzed with her toxins. That opening is all Mary needs, and she takes Echidna down using a demon-killing bullet. Even after being attacked by demons yet again though, she makes a call to her team and demands that they protect the Makaian refugees and help them escape. But Baines hears about this and orders his Darkham soldiers to eliminate every single Makaian refugee. By the time Plasma wakes up, he sees all of his Makaian allies being slaughtered, and heartbroken, he chooses to sacrifice himself and blow up the building to kill as many Darkham soldiers as possible. While he prepares to do this, Dante and Rudra crash into the building and Mary steps in to kill the demon, just in time for everything to explode. However, Dante manages to grab her and jump out of the window at the last moment, saving both of them in the process. Afterwards, Dante admits that Mary was correct about him being a demon, but even knowing that, the two join forces and take on the White Rabbit. Importantly, Mary realizes that Dante awakening his demonic abilities was probably what the rabbit was waiting for to tear down the barrier, so she locks Dante away to keep his blood out of the rabbit's hands at all costs. At some point during all of this, the White Rabbit meets with Nello Angelo again in Makai, and this time he gives the rabbit a vial of Vergil's blood so that he can use it to open the barrier. Now all he needs is Dante's as well. Once he returns to the human world, the rabbit meets with Mary, who demands he hands over the amulet or threatens to burn Dante to ashes, guaranteeing that none of his blood will remain for the rabbit to use. However, the rabbit calls her bluff and sends his army to attack her, and while she puts up a solid fight, the demon's weapons are all coated in Echidna's poison and the first scratch leaves her paralyzed. Luckily, Dante breaks free and jumps in just in time to pull her out of the fight and confronts the rabbit himself. But before they actually fight, the rabbit offers to show Dante the world that his father sealed off and brings him to Makai. Here, Dante is completely overwhelmed and incapacitated by the poisonous air, and the rabbit explains that he plans to open up the barrier to let the Makaians leave this world and enter the human realm to escape, and that from his perspective, sacrificing human lives is necessary if it means saving his own kind. Dante can't accept that sacrifice though, and so the fight with the rabbit's forces picks back up, and he manages to beat each of them, even Cavalier, while the rabbit finally reveals his true identity to Mary and explains that she is to blame for creating him. Ultimately, Dante manages to defeat the rabbit as well, and the rabbit warns that everything that comes next could have been avoided. With that, Dante takes back his amulet, and the rabbit falls into the river, presumably to his death. Not long after, Enzo and Baines finally arrive, and the Vice President frames the area to look like an attack on humanity by the demons. An attack which the United States definitely fended off. He also tells Mary that he no longer trusts her after she chose to work alongside Dante. However, this alliance becomes necessary once again when the rabbit returns. He had consumed one of his subordinates and transformed into a corrupt demonic monster that fuses with the Force Edge. And he almost immediately rips through all of Darkham's forces, and Dante and Mary need to team up to take him on as the last line of defense. Even Enzo makes an effort to protect Dante, but when he does, the rabbit kills him right away. With that, he manages to take back the amulet and combines it with the Force Edge into the Sparta sword. Seeing this though, Dante laughs, knowing that without Vergil's blood the seal can't be broken. However, the rabbit explains that Vergil is very much alive and uses the vial of blood from Nello Angelo to activate the weapon. Dante is stun-locked by this to learn that his brother is still out there, and while he's frozen, the rabbit stabs him, collecting the last piece of the puzzle and opening the realm up. Demons quickly begin pouring into Earth. However, before things can get too far out of control, Mary fires a shot that rips apart the rabbit's artificial heart and cuts off the arm that the Sparta sword is connected to. This weakens him and creates an opening for Dante to take up his father's weapon, enter his devil trigger, and finally kill the rabbit, removing the perfect amulet. And in that moment, the barrier is completely reset. With the world saved for the moment, Dante asks Mary to join him in tracking down Vergil. However, instead she knocks him out and takes him into custody at Arkham. She feels terrible about this, but she also fears that he might be used as a weapon again in the future. And speaking of weapons, Baines gets control of the rabbit's device to open portals between the worlds and begins an all-out assault on Makai, in which he kills countless innocent demons. Arkham ends up putting Dante in a cryogenic pod, waiting to use him at a later date while studying his blood, and allows Arius and Ouroboros to create a prison facility within Makai where they hold and experiment on demons. Over the next few months, there are several raids which go into the Makayan realm. However, eventually Mary is sent on an infiltration mission into Castle Mundus with a suit created by Arius' company to assist with stealth and tracking in hopes of finding a weapon that can turn the tide against the Makayans. Meanwhile, hundreds of soldiers are sent to the front gate to serve as a distraction where the Angelos and other aggressive demons slaughter them, though they do manage to take out at least one particularly large demon. Inside the castle, Lady finds many innocent Makayans who are imprisoned and being tortured by Mundus' jailers. Despite her orders, she goes out of her way to kill the demon who is abusing them and sets them all free. At the same time, a demonic jester working alongside humanity provokes Mundus into joining the war effort himself, and as he leaves his throne room to obliterate the frontline soldiers, Lady makes her way into it and steals an ancient artifact called the Arcana Chalice, which was embedded in Mundus' seat. Elsewhere in Makai, a woman who is one of Arius' secretaries wanders into the territory of a group of demons. But as they try to kill her, Vergil slaughters each and every one of them with ease as Nello Angelo, well, all but one, which the woman manages to kill herself before announcing that she knows Vergil's true identity. She explains that she is a messenger from Ouroboros who brags about how humanity stole the Arcana Chalice from Mundus and goes Vergil to the human realm by saying that she can reveal who killed his mother. And speaking of the human realm, the public is very divided by this war against the demons, but severe propaganda is put in place to glorify both the president and Arkham, which again happens to be under Arius and the Ouroboros company umbrella. When Lady finally returns, she tries to quit working for Arius, however he offers her the position of commander of Arkham's military and gives her carte blanche access to control over the organization. He goes on to tell her that the artifacts she collected was the fourth and final part of a weapon which could be used to actually kill Mundus, and ultimately, she accepts the job so that no one else could make things worse while she turns a blind eye to the problem. And speaking of making things worse, the Jester approaches Vergil in Makai and once again tries to get him to cross over to the human world, all so that Arius can spring a trap and use the new demon-slaying bullets made from Dante's blood to paralyze Vergil and use both brothers to empower himself. However, this only prompts Vergil to return to Mundus and warn him that Argosax might be involved in the war, and somehow helping humanity and giving them knowledge of the Arcana. And to that end, Vergil plans to travel to the human world, recover the weapons, and find the traitor leaking information to humanity. With that, he uses Yamato to cut a door to the human world, and Arius launches his attack. Using cloaking technology, the Arkham soldiers manage to capture Vergil, but when he sees Argosax's brand on their weapons, he becomes enraged and takes on the whole military on his own, which of course is all part of Arius' real plan to have one of these survivors lead Vergil further into his trap. Despite the Vice President's hesitance, Arius demands that they begin considering thawing Dante out so that they can use him against his brother, adding that this was the whole reason that he promoted Lady to begin with, as she can act as an intermediary between the two. And speaking of Dante, while frozen, he continues to relive terrible nightmares about the demon attack on his childhood home, and the guilt that he feels over what he thought was letting Vergil die. Though of course, Vergil is still very much alive, and is currently liberating an Ouroboros detention center in Makai. When Dante is finally woken up, Lady goes to tell him that Vergil is out there and working for Mundus now. They do some JoJo poses, and she eventually brings him to meet with Arius. After which, they visit Nell Goldstein for some much-needed weapons upgrade, and in particular, he picks up his Rebellion once again, as well as his new pistols, Ebony and Ivory. While there, Nell tunes into the Stan Sullivan show, which happens to have a surprise guest who is Vergil. And he tells the world that the propaganda they are being fed is nonsense, and even shows them some of the brutal experiments that humanity is performing on civilian demons under Ouroboros' order. This royally pisses off Arius, but it interests the president enough to reach out and speak to Vergil personally, and he even gives him the location and access code for Ouroboros' headquarters in exchange for a public yet false surrender from Mundus, which would make the president look stronger to his American people. Seeing Vergil here both confirms to Lady that she needs to look into the experiments on innocent demons, and tells Dante that his brother actually is working for the demon who killed their family. Soon the brothers come face to face and battle at the Capitol, and Dante is far weaker than his brother at this point, and also far less willing to kill his brother as well, which puts him at a bit of a disadvantage. However, Arius is not hesitating and orders a sniper to use a Demon Slayer shot through Dante to hit Vergil. This sets Lady off a little bit, but the shot doesn't land, and Vergil kills the sniper, which enrages Dante seeing a human be killed for nothing, to the point where he's able to push his brother into a corner, at least for a moment. But even with this anger, he still isn't convicted enough to kill Vergil, which allows Vergil the chance to pin Dante against the wall with the rebellion, before descending towards Arius, Lady, and Baines in Ouroboros' headquarters. He ultimately lets Lady go when she shows her hatred for all that is happening, as well as her care for Dante. But when he goes in to attack Arius, the man uses demonic power to betray Baines and overwhelm Vergil. Arius then takes the Arcana Chalice and fuses it into himself and claims Sparda's sword, becoming monstrously powerful as a result. While they fight, Arius reveals that he had no part in the attack on Vergil's home, though Vergil doesn't entirely believe it at first. Either way, the man's demonic magic completely freezes Vergil in place, and while he's stuck there, Arius announces that he will use all 4 Arcana to revive Argosax into Makai. Meanwhile, Lady peels Dante off the wall and explains the truth about her role in creating the White Rabbit, and now that she knows how cruel Baines can be, she wants to take responsibility by leaving Darkham as well. However, part of her apology also includes leading Dante back down to his brother. They arrive just in time to free Vergil, and Yamato slices off Arius' arm before he and his subordinate escape into the demon world. Though, with Yamato in hand, Vergil is able to open a portal after them, and he, Dante, and Lady follow through. On the other side, Vergil tells the others Arius' plan, and that they have 22 hours until an eclipse allows him to complete his goals. And speaking of which, his next step towards reaching those goals involves sending Baines to capture the president for betraying humanity against Mundus. However, as tensions raise, a Darkham soldier opens fire on the president, making Baines the new leader of America. Now, back in Makai, Lady leads the brothers towards the other Arcana, but while doing so, she touches a cursed mirror. More specifically, it is an oracle called a Tres Magia. This makes her hallucinate a conversation with the White Rabbit, and forces her to face all of her fear and guilt head-on, as the lure pulls her inside of itself. That is until Dante manages to pull her away at the very last moment. When the trio finally make their way to the Arcana, Arius' secretaries also arrive, and as Lady fires into one, they explode, revealing that the secretaries are demonic. They aren't the only demons here though, and a full army of Arius' experimental monsters swarm down on them from every direction. They initially fight them off together, but eventually Vergil opens a portal, sending both Lady and Dante back to the human realm as he continues the battle on his own. And this is just in time for Arius to show up. With him now on the demon side, Vergil is pretty quickly put on the back foot, and is ultimately warped away, allowing Arius to reunite the 4 Arcana. This leaves Lady feeling like a complete failure. However, she doesn't know that Dante secretly swapped out one of the Arcana with a coin, ultimately giving her another chance at redemption and a good reason to smooch the boy. Good for him. Either way, Dante wants to go back to protect his brother, but Lady tells him that Vergil wants him to keep the Arcana away from Arius, so they need to do all they can to follow his direction, and Dante comes up with the idea to visit an old magical acquaintance called Professor Lucan. With that, they commandeer a motorcycle and ride out to visit him. Seeing the Arcana Medaglia, Lucan uses his powers to cloak the artifact's energy, as well as sending distracting copies all over the world, while also beginning an effort to destroy the actual Medaglia. This, however, will take 8 hours, and in the meantime, Dante and Lady need to protect him from any would-be attackers, as well as his granddaughter Matilda's distractions. Luckily, the kid has pretty good taste in music, so the babysitting isn't too bad. That night, Dante and Lady have a heart-to-heart about how they deal with their own pain, but their sweet moment is interrupted when Arius and his soldiers eventually make their way to Lucan's estate. Matilda freaks out when she sees the intruders, but Dante gives her the job of keeping his pendant safe to keep her focused, at least enough to run away and hide. At first, holding the secretaries off isn't too bad, but soon they transform into demonic harpies, claiming that they are also hybrids like Dante, but they can actually control their abilities. Even so, Dante and Lady continue holding them off until they are ultimately overrun and Lady gets stabbed. But just as Lady is about to be killed, Dante activates his devil trigger and evens the odds. However, while he is stronger than ever, Lady is still a human and becomes a new target for Kai, who kidnaps her and creates an opening for the other secretaries to slice into her until they drop her to her death. With that, Dante goes on a full rampage, but in doing so, he allows Arius to take Matilda hostage. This forces Lucan to stop his ritual, and ultimately he trades the coin for his granddaughter's life. But Arius has him killed moments later anyways, before warping Matilda away just as he had Vergil. Luckily, all is not lost, and Baines manages to use Arius' technology to heal Lady. She tries to warn the president that Arius will use the Arcana to kill millions and free Argosax, but he just sees this as a rapture and the will of God. That said, Baines also goes on to explain that Lady's father is also still alive out there, and that he is working as a double agent that is trying to end Mundus. As Baines leaves, Lady begs him not to allow Arius to use the Arcana, however he just walks away silently. And speaking of which, at the same time, Dante is being held by Arius, who is trying to recruit him by showing him visions of the past with the Arcana. Dante witnesses Argosax's rule and the countless lives that were offered up to him until Mundus stabbed him in the back. The two demon gods battled, and ultimately Argosax was defeated, as we know, leading to the Arcana being sent to Earth, where Arius claimed one. The vision ultimately concludes with Dante goading Arius into freeing him so that he can make a counterattack. But this goes very poorly, and eventually Arius chooses to siphon Dante's blood rather than trying to win him over. He also explains that he is holding Vergil in another reality and waiting to use him as a time bomb once he learns that Mundus has been lying to him this whole time. As I mentioned, Matilda is also being held in that same Trismagia reality and is currently trying to get back Dante's locket from a group of demons, and seeing that, Vergil steps in to help her. In doing so, he also recovers his sword, but in this world he is unable to tear through realities, meaning he will have to fight the Trismagia to escape. Vergil and Matilda end up having quite a lot to bond over as he warms up to her pretty quickly over shared tragedy. I mean, like Vergil's version of warming up to someone anyways, and soon they arrive at the Trismagia. But by the time they actually get there, the eclipse is mere minutes away. Baines goes on to actually confront Arius, but his demonic magic stops the effort pretty quickly. But luckily, the guard that Baines left in charge of holding Lady gets cold feet and releases her, allowing her to make it just in time to try and save the president, at least for a few extra seconds. That said, Lady is also nearly killed here, but Dante breaks free in his devil trigger and manages to protect Lady as well, though he is knocked out as a result. With nothing left to stop him and the eclipse overhead, Arius activates the Arcana, consuming the lives of everyone nearby and becoming the reincarnated Argosax. And things are not going much better for Vergil. The Trismagia attack and force him to relive his most painful memories, as well as visions of details which had been left out. For example, Mundus branding soldiers with Argosax's crest so that Vergil would believe his lies. However, rather than breaking with this knowledge, Vergil simply accepts it and shatters the Trismagia illusion to free himself and Matilda from the mirror realm, as he vows he will take his revenge. While he comes face to face with the reality of his life, Argosax, Argosax, whatever you want to call him, continues absorbing more and more lives and becoming more and more powerful as he evolves little by little. And as he's doing that, Kai prepares to tear down Sparta's wall so that Arius can get into Makai and kill Mundus the second he is powerful enough. So Dante goes to Arius by riding an RPG while Lady heads towards Kai, probably on foot. Ultimately, Arius' progress is sped up quite a lot when he manages to absorb some of Dante's energy, but luckily Vergil gets there just in time to cut the tether. He gets his brother away and quickly tries to teach Dante to enter his devil trigger at will by releasing his rage. But while Vergil goes on the offensive, Dante still needs some time to figure things out, and rather than focusing on his rage, he has a vision of getting encouragement from his mother, and it's his love and acceptance of his pain that allows him to transform. With that, the Sparta brothers turn on some music and get to work slaying the demonic kaiju. At the same time, Kai nearly kills Lady, but Matilda comes in clutch and kills the demon before she can land her final attack. But even despite things finally looking up, Arius once again manages to siphon more energy and evolves. With this new boost, the demon is officially too strong for the brothers to kill, and so Dante comes up with a plan. He asks Lady to open the gate to Makai and wants to force Arius through to fight Mundus before he's at full strength, in hopes that Mundus will be able to kill him. And as they send him across, Vergil dives in after him, and Dante follows, but unfortunately, Lady drops Sparta's sword and falls unconscious. This leaves the gate between worlds open, and there is no way to close it for the time being. It would only be moments after landing in Makai that Mundus arrived to challenge Arius, and as the Titans fight, Dante and Vergil spot their father's sword falling through the rift and race towards it to separate the amulet from the sword before the barrier is gone forever. Ultimately, Mundus manages to rip Arius out of Argosax's body, severely weakening the demon and giving Mundus enough of an upper hand to behead his opponent. But with Argosax out of the way, Mundus's forces can focus on the Sparda brothers and keeping them away from their father's sword. As they are surrounded, Mundus tries to manipulate Vergil to win him over to his side once more. He goes on to explain the truth of Sparda's loyalty and that it was his own paranoia that drove them apart. However, Mundus also adds that Sparda likely didn't care much for Eva or the brothers at all, having only known them for a few years in the thousands of his own life. Ultimately, Mundus fails to win Vergil over, and he and Dante take on Mundus's army as they rush towards the Sparda sword. But as they grab it, they find themselves fighting for different worlds. Dante wants to protect Earth, while Vergil wants to do all he can to save Makai. And this time, Vergil comes out ahead. He sends his brother back through the portal and forces it closed, launching the amulet through it with him, much to Mundus's disappointment. Vergil then turns to the demon and vows that Makai would invade the human world eventually, however it will do it under his own leadership, not Mundus's. And with that, the two begin their new fight. Back on Earth, Lady wakes up and chooses not to meet with Dante as she promised, and instead returns to Nell for new weapons as she prepares to hunt down her father, the Demon Jester. And with that, we are up to date on everything from the Devil May Cry games, manga, books, audio series, original anime, and new Netflix adaptation. There is a lot to go over here. I hope you enjoyed our journey through it all. If you did, remember to leave a like and subscribe. Of course, if you have other series that you would like us to take a dive into, leave those in the comments down below. This is a brand new channel, like I said, so any and all support goes a massive way in helping us get started. All that being said though, thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.